Last time we took a deeper dive into the respiratory system and we talked about the lung system in Chinese medicine. And one thing about Chinese physiology is that we don't think much about the brain so much as far as our psycho-emotional self. We actually believe that there's a part of our psycho-emotional self that resides in different organs, and there's 5 of these parts. And one of them resides in the lungs, and the one that resides in the lungs is called the Po. But there's 4 others. One is called the Hun, which resides in the liver system. One is called the Zhi, that resides in the kidney system. One is called the Yi, which resides in the spleen system. And one is called the Shen, which resides in the heart system. And the Shen is interesting because the Shen, there's 2 definitions for Shen. The Shen that I just described, the one that's part of the 5, okay, is like Shen lowercase s, okay? And it loosely corresponds with like the soul or the spirit. But there's also the Shen capital S, because Shen capital S includes all the other 5 put together. So that's more of a comprehensive, complete picture of our psycho-emotional self. So when we talk about, so we have to kind of put in a little groundwork here before we can like jump into the Po. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is the psyche in Chinese medicine and what that actually means and what the Shen actually means, big S and little s. So the first thing is that the Shen is considered one of the body's vital substances. So what is that? Well, there's 3 vital substances in Chinese medicine, and they're called the 3 treasures. And they don't have a physical form. They're more like rarefied qi. We've talked about qi before being the energy that flows through the body in a really complex way. And so the 3 vital substances are the essence or jing, the qi, and then the Shen. And these are called the 3 treasures. So the Shen is like the most rarefied form of qi. So the Shen that resides in the heart, the little s Shen, is involved in activities like thinking, consciousness, self-identity, insight, memory, and all of those things depend on the health of the heart. Then Shen capital S indicates all 5 of the mental spiritual aspects of the human being, like the Hun, the Po, the Yi, the Zhi, all mixed together. So the character for Shen, the Chinese character, is composed of 2 radicals, and the radicals are like the smaller parts of the design. So one of them translates as an influx from heaven, auspicious or inauspicious signs by which the will of heaven is known to humankind. Okay, that's a quote. So an influx of heavenly energy. And then the other radical, Shen, means to express or to explain or to extend. So the Chinese character for Shen conveys 2 different ideas: spiritual manifestation and to extend. Like extend meaning outward into the environment, or extends from the individual out into the environment. So the Shen draws its biological basis and nourishment from something called the prenatal essence that is stored in the kidneys. And the prenatal essence is what we inherit from our mother and father at conception. And then the other thing that nourishes the Shen is what's called postnatal essence, which is what is produced by the lungs, the stomach, and the spleen. It's made from the food that we consume and the food and drink that we consume. The Shen little s, which resolves in the heart, is involved in thinking, insight, sleep, memory, the emotional life, intelligence, consciousness, thinking, wisdom, and ideas. So thinking depends on the mind. If the mind is strong, thinking will be clear. Memory has 2 different meanings. On the one hand, it is the capacity for memorizing, and on the other hand, it refers to the ability to remember past events. Both of these depend on the Shen, and so the heart. Consciousness indicates the totality of thoughts and perceptions, as well as the state of being conscious, like actually being awake. And then insight. So insight indicates our capacity for self-knowledge or self-recognition and identity of the self. So that also depends on the Shen of the heart. So, for example, in cases of serious mental illness like schizophrenia, where the sense of self either deteriorates or is lost, that is directly related to the health of the lack of health of the Shen in the heart. Also, our emotional life depends on the Shen. Emotional life refers to like the perception and feeling of emotional stimuli. So, so, so different types of emotions resonate with different organs in the body. So, like, for example, the Hun, which resides in the liver, resonates with feelings of anger, okay? But the liver doesn't feel anger. Only the Shen in the heart feels the emotions. So, another one would be the spleen, the E, can resonate with like worry but the spleen doesn't feel the worry. It's the Shen that feels the worry because the Shen is responsible for feeling all of our emotions. Slide. Sleep is also dependent on the state of the Shen. And intelligence also depends on the Shen, which resides in the heart. So a strong heart and a strong Shen will make a person intelligent. A weak heart or mind will render a person more dull. And then wisdom. So wisdom's kind of an interesting concept. Like that also depends on a strong heart and a healthy Shen. The Shen is responsible for knowing and perceiving, and it also gives us the ability to apply this knowledge critically and wisely. So the Shen of the heart is very important, performs this very important function of coordinating and integrating the various parts of our mental emotional life that reside in the different organs. This is probably its most important characteristic and function, is that it kind of, organizes the other parts of our mental emotional state. Now, obviously, like, what about the brain? Okay, well, the Chinese knew that the brain was really important. And many doctors in the classics did attribute mental functions to the brain. They understood that. Now, the other thing about the Shen is that it has a role with all of the senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Our sense organs are actually called the orifices of the heart. So the eyes are related to the liver. The liver system controls the eyes, but it is the Shen that actually sees. Hearing depends on the kidney system, but the heart also has an influence on hearing, and the heart is the thing that actually hears. The sense of smell, the lung rules the sense of smell and the nose, but again, it's the Shen that actually experiences that sensation or that sense. Taste also depends on the spleen, but also it's the heart, the Shen, that actually experiences taste. And as an aside, the tongue is called the sprout of the heart in Chinese medicine. Touch is also the sense of touch is also dependent on the heart and the Shen. So we've got the Shen, little s, Shen, living in the heart, and then we have those other parts of our psycho-emotional self. And so Shen, capital S, refers to all those five mixed or put together. And that Shen, capital S, plays a pivotal and leading role in all mental activities. So it synthesizes all of the other parts of our psycho-emotional self into one. So the different five, and they're actually called the five Shen, which even makes it more complicated because we've got Shen, little s, Shen, capital S, and then Shen, five Shen. So we've got the Shen of the heart. We've got the Hun of the liver, which is also called the Ethereal Soul. We have the Po of the lungs, which is called the corporeal soul. And then we have the E of the spleen, which is called the intellect. And then we have the Jur of the kidneys, which is referred to as the willpower. So the 5 yin organs, and the yin organs are the lung, the spleen, the heart, the kidney, and the liver, are the physiological basis of the spirit. The state of the qi and blood of each of the organs can influence the Shen, or the spirit, and conversely, alterations of the mind or the spirit can also affect the internal organs. Okay, so that's the Shen, capital S, Shen, little s. So before we get to the Po, we have to talk a little bit about the Hun. So the Hun broadly corresponds to our Western concept of soul. So according to ancient Chinese beliefs, it enters the body shortly after birth. So it's called the Hun, or the ethereal soul. It's very ethereal. After death, it survives the body and it flows back to quote-unquote heaven, meaning the ancient Chinese concept of heaven, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Christian concept of heaven. The Chinese concept of heaven is a state of subtle or non-material energies and beings that has nothing to do with the Western Christian concept of heaven. So if we look at the character for Hun, it's made up of 2 radicals, 2 different design elements on the left and the right. The radical on the left is the radical for clouds, and on the right is the character for spirit or ghost. So the combination of these 2 radicals for cloud and ghost or spirit combined into the character for Hun conveys the idea of its nature. It's like a ghost or like a spirit of a dead person, but it is young and ethereal in nature, and it's essentially harmless. It's not an evil thing at all. It's not a kind of evil spirit, because the radical for cloud, which is like, very benign, the radical for cloud shows that the Hun is benign. It's not an evil type of thing. So there's 3 types of Hun, or the 3 types of ethereal soul. The first one is called the vegetative soul, and it's got a Chinese name, which I will spare you since my Chinese pronunciation is so terrible. So I'll just give you the English translation, which is clear spirit. And the vegetative ethereal soul is common to plants, animals, and human beings. So plants, animals, and human beings all have the vegetative soul, or the clear spirit. Then there's the second type of ethereal soul is called the animal spirit. And the English translation of that is brilliant light. And it is common to animals and human beings. So it is a type of ethereal soul that is common to animals and human beings. And then the third one is called dark essence, and that is the human one, which is present only in human beings. So all living beings have a soul. It's just the plants have a vegetative soul, animals have a vegetative and an animal soul, and humans have a vegetative, animal, and human soul. And this is closely linked to in ancient Chinese beliefs about spirits, ghosts, and demons. It was believed that spirits, ghosts, and demons are spirit-like creatures who preserve a physical appearance after death and wander in the world of spirit, and some are good and some are evil. So in the times prior to the Warring States period, a belief in naturalistic causes of disease, such as the weather, gradually came to the forefront. However, the belief in spirits has never really diminished even to this day. So before the Warring States period, most illness was attributed to spirits, ghosts, or demons. And then after that, they started to realize that, actually there might be some more practical kind of reasons why people are having these illnesses. So what the heck is the ethereal soul, or the Hun? If we look at the character, it's ethereal, it's kind of dark or subterranean, it's intuitive, non-rational side of human beings. It's not consciousness. It enters and exits through the nose. It is said to enter and exit through the nose, and it communicates with heaven. The thing about the Hun also is that it has a slightly, it's more independent of the Shen than the other aspects that reside in the different organs. The Hun has its own kind of life and its own agenda, and the interaction of the mind and the ethereal soul, or the Shen and the Hun, is the basis for our psychic life. So the E of the spleen and the Jur of the kidneys don't have an independent existence, but could be said to be part of the Shen of the heart. But what we'll see when we look at the Po is that it too has an independent existence. So that's why we're looking at the Hun first and getting a little bit of an understanding about the Hun. So the Hun, the ethereal soul, is imparted to the baby by the father. So according to ancient Chinese beliefs, the ethereal soul or Hun is imparted by the father 3 days after birth during a naming ceremony. And this is when the baby was given a name and the father imparts the Hun to the baby. Why is that significant? Because it's significant, it's symbolic of the social, relational nature of the Hun. So the Hun is responsible for relations and for relationships and for our relating to other people in the family and society. So the ceremony during which the father imparted the Hun and the name to the baby 3 days after birth is symbolic of the fact that through this ceremony, the baby was assigned his or her place in the family and society. So the Hun corresponds to our individuality, but an individuality within the family and society and not separate from it. And then there's this concept of movement or swirling or wandering that has to do with the Hun. So the Hun provides what's called movement to the psyche in many ways. Movement of the soul out of the body, as in dreaming. The soul leaves the body and experiences things in the dream world. Movement out of one's everyday life, as in dreams or ideas, thinking about, where you want to be in life or having goals, that kind of thing. Movement towards other people as far as in relationships, and movement in terms of plans or projects. So the nature and the function of the Hun are the following: sleep and dreaming, mental activities, a balance of the emotions. When the Hun gets out of balance, the emotions can be out of balance. It's related to the eyes and sight. It also is said to be our courage, and also planning, and also it has a very intimate relationship with the Shen. So sleeping and dreaming. Vision, the liver rules the eyes, and so vision, as far as the Hun is concerned, it means vision, like actually being able to see, but it also means vision or plans. So when it is the liver, we have internal visualization, as in dreams, goals, or life dreams. So we've probably all known people who have big ideas, but they can never actually complete them or actually pursue them. So they have the Hun, right? But they actually don't. That actually is like a problem with the jur or the kidney part of our psycho-emotional self, where they don't have the willpower to actually carry through or manifest what they want, but they still have the dreams. So the Hun assists the Shen in mental activities, and it provides the Shen, which is responsible for rational thinking, with intuition and inspiration. So that's the other thing about the Hun. It also gives the mind movement in the sense that it allows the Shen the capacity of self-insight and introspection, as well as the ability to project outwards and relate to other people. Yeah, so the Hun is all about intuition, inspiration, movement towards others, as in relationships, creativity, life dreams, planning, imagination, projects, symbols, and archetypes. So the Shen, if it didn't have the Hun, it would be like this powerful computer, but without the software. The Hun is kind of like the software. And the Hun is said to, we mentioned this before, kind of coming and going, or it has sort of a movement associated with it. And so that movement has to be in harmonious balance. So, and it has to do with things like the liver blood and the liver chee, which is the yin and yang of the liver. So the liver blood and the liver chee have to be in harmonious balance. The liver blood has to root the liver chee to prevent it from becoming stagnant or rebelling. On a mental emotional level, liver blood needs to root the Hun, thus allowing a balanced and happy emotional life. So if there is a liver blood deficiency, the Hun may be unrooted and might have too much movement, which would involve being scattered and not being able to or be angry or emotional or agitated, where the Hun is not sufficiently rooted. We want the Hun to have movement and come and go, but we also don't want it to come and go too much. So so there's like these two opposing emotional states. When the liver chi is hyperactive, meaning there's excessive coming and going of the Hun, or when the liver chi is stagnant and there's not enough movement of the Hun, then we have two different problems. We either have hyperactivity, hyper thinking, scattered thoughts, some types of anxiety, even mania. But then if it's stagnant and it's not moving, we can have depression or what's the word? Inhibition, that kind of thing. If the liver is in good shape, the Hun is rooted and can help us plan our life with vision, wisdom, and creativity. If liver blood or liver chi are deficient, then the Hun does not, quote, unquote, come and go enough, and we lack a sense of direction and vision in life. So the Shen and the Hun are both yang in nature. They're closely connected to each other, and they both partake in all of the mental activities of a human being. Through the Hun, the mind can project outward to the external world, to other people, and it can also turn inward to receive the intuition or inspiration or dreams or images deriving from the unconscious. So ideally, the Hun provides the mind with movement, manifesting with aims, intuition, creativity, ideas, life dreams, etc., while the mind provides the Hun with some control and integration. So if the mind is not strong and the mind can't provide that control and integration of the Hun, then the Hun can kind of like take off and be all over the place. So there has to be this harmonious balance between the Shen and the Hun. So the Shen has to exercise some form of control over the material coming from the Hun. And also, the Shen can only cope with really one idea at a time. So originating from the Hun. So the Hun is kind of like a fire hose of ideas and inspiration and imagination and creativity, but it's the mind that has to put some kind of control or filter on it. Otherwise, it just gets overwhelmed. So if the Hun doesn't come and go enough, it can lack movement and inspiration, and the person may be depressed without aim or life dreams. Or if the Shen is over controlling of the Hun, as in people who are rigid in their views and repressed, then depression can also be the result. If the Shen is weak, and it doesn't control the Hun, it may be too restless and its movement too excessive, and that brings about confusion and chaos to the mind and makes the person scattered, unsettled, or maybe even manic. And this is seen in those people who are full of ideas, dreams, and projects, none of which ever come to fruition because the chaotic state of the mind is unable to control the Hun. If the mind is, or the Shen, I should say, is weak and the Hun comes and goes too much, contents is continuously breaking through from the Hun, and it can't be integrated by the mind. So the mind needs to integrate the Hun so that all the images and symbols and dreams and creativity and inspiration and all that stuff coming from it can be assimilated. The Shen brings together two disparate ways of seeing the world, the conscious and rational one, which is the Shen, and the entirely different one, which is the Hun. And they have to be integrated and work in harmonious balance. That's the Shen and the Hun. So I'd like to start out this part with talk about like what is the universal mind, because we actually have that concept in Chinese medicine. So the Shen can be said to be the individual mind, and the Hun is the link to the individual, between the individual and the universal mind. So what's that mean? The universal mind is the repository of images, archetypes, symbols, and ideas belonging to the collective unconsciousness, like in Jungian psychology. So these often manifest to our minds like myths or symbols or dreams, and they come into our consciousness via the Hun because this belongs to the world of image and ideas. The Hun is of vital importance for our mental and spiritual life. Without the Hun, our mental and spiritual life would be quite, sterile, deprived of images, ideas, or dreams. If the liver is strong and the Hun is firm, ideas and images from the universal mind flow freely, and the mental and spiritual state will be happy, creative, and fruitful. That's the Shen and the Hun. The next part of our psycho-emotional self is the Po. So we finally got here to the Po. So here's the Po. The Po is also called the corporeal soul. So the corporeal soul, or the Po, resides in the lungs and is the physical counterpart of the Hun. So the Chinese character is composed of two parts. One is the radical Gui, which means spirit or ghost, which is the same radical that we saw in the Hun. Okay. The other is the radical for Bai, which means white. So the radical for white is related to the light of the waxing moon. This is in keeping with the association of the Po with yin, the moon being very yin, the sun being yang, as opposed to the Hun, which is yang in nature. So the Po is like the yin part of our psycho-emotional self, where the Hun is like the yang part. So the Po comes into being on the third day after conception, analogous to the crescent moon on the third day of the waxing moon. And the color white conveys the idea that the Po is a human physical soul. So the Po is that part of the soul, as opposed to the Hun, which is totally attached to the body and goes down to the earth with it in death. So remember, the Hun leaves the body at death and returns to heaven, but the Po goes with the body back into the earth. It's closely linked to the body and is the somatic expression of the soul and the organizational principle of the body. So the Po is active from conception and it shapes the body. So it's kind of like DNA, right? It's the organizational principle of the organism and the coordinating force of all physiological processes. So there's 7 parts to the Po. So the Po consists of the 5 senses, the limbs, and then the Po as a whole. We talked a little bit about the Hun representing movement, but the Po is about physical movement. It's about actually like moving the body through space, and also all of the physiological processes within our bodies, like respiration and digestion and all that stuff. So the Po gives the body the capacity for movement, agility, balance, and coordination. And the Po is closely linked to the Jing. So remember, Jing was one of the 3 treasures. And Jing so the Po derives from the mother and arises at conception. So the Po is closely linked to the Jing and is the first to come into being after conception. Both the Jing and the Po represent the organizational principles of life that shape the body. The Jing is also called our essence, and it's the most, I guess, physiological, real sort of form of chee, even though it still doesn't actually have a physical form. So the Po can be thought of as the manifestation of Jing in the sphere of sensations and feelings. So just as the Hun provides psychic movement to the Shen, the Po provides physical movement to the Jing. So the Jing is our essence. It's the foundational energy of the body. And so the Po provides actual physiological or physical movement of the Jing out in the world. So it basically is responsible for us like being able to like walk around and interact with our environment. So without the Po, the Jing would be a vital substance, but it would be inert. It wouldn't be able to like move or interact or breathe or anything. The Po gives rise to human form during gestation. The Po has a centripetal, separating, materializing, and aggregating kind of movement. So it separates, it aggregates, it brings. It's responsible for the development of the fetus. So when a baby is born, in the first month of its life, it's said to be quote unquote all Po, because it has the Po has been operating since 3 days after conception, organizing the body and being responsible for the development of the body. And the Po is responsible for touch and skin sensations, and it's nourished by the mother's Po through breast milk and also from touching. So remember, the Hun is imparted by the father after birth, and so the Hun is still kind of more in its infancy than the Po. Later in life, the Po gives us the capacity of sensation, of feeling, of hearing, and sight. So when the Po is flourishing, the ears and the eyes are good. The decline of hearing and sight in old people is due to a weakening of the Po. So we often attribute the decline of sensory acuity to in the elderly to the decline of the kidneys in Chinese medicine and of the Jing, and this could be so, but the influence of the Po could even be more important. So the skin, the Po, and the lungs. So we talked recently about how, or last week I think, about how the lungs and the skin in Chinese medicine are considered the same organ because they're open to the air. And so in one of the classics, there was a quote that said, "The Po can move and do things, and when it is active, pain and itching can be felt." As the Po is so closely related to the body, it's the first to be affected when needles are inserted. The almost immediate feeling of relaxation following the insertion of needles is due to the unwinding of the Po. Through it, the mind, or the Shen and the Hun and the Yi and the Zhi are all affected. So this explains like the somatic expression on the skin of emotional tension that affects the Po and the connection between the Po, the lungs, and the skin. The Po is also related to weeping and crying. Just as the Po makes us feel pain on a physical level, it also allows us to cry and weep when subject to grief and sadness. So unexpressed grief constricts the Po and gives rise to what we call accumulations. Emotional stress, especially worry or pensiveness or grief or sadness, make the Po kind of constrict and cause lung qi to stagnate in the chest. And many of us have probably experienced that. When we have experienced deep grief, we feel it in our chest. We physically feel the energy in our chest being constricted. And sometimes it can even hurt. That's lung qi stagnating in the chest. Some modern doctors consider the Po to be, quote unquote, basic regulatory activity of all physiological functions of the body, which you could say that. In this sense, it's the manifestation of the lungs' function of regulating all physiological activities. Why do the lungs relate to all physiological activities? Well, because the lungs govern the qi. So whatever's going on with the qi, the lungs are involved. The lungs also control all the channels in the blood vessels, and the lungs govern breathing. So as qi is the basis for all physiological activities, the lungs, by governing the qi, are naturally in charge of all physiological activities. So the Po is the expression of the lungs' regulatory function in all physiological processes. The Po is the physical soul that makes physical regulation possible. So what about breathing? So the Po is closely linked to breathing. So breathing can be seen as sort of like a pulsating of the Po. Meditation makes use of the link between breathing and the Po. By concentrating on breathing in meditation, a person quiets the Po. The Shen becomes still and empty through this, and the Hun becomes open and can get in touch with the universal mind. So another kind of difference between the Hun and the Po is the Po is related to our life as individuals, while the Hun is responsible for our relations with other people and with the world. So the Hun is more like the extroverted part of ourselves, and the Po is more like the introverted part of ourselves. So that's basically about the Po, and a little bit about the Hun and the Shen.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Awesome stuff. Thank you. And I think we answered the question today. How do you get Scott to shut up? Take the camera away. So, anyways, as always, this is Susan Wellman. She is an Oriental medicine doctor and East Asian medical practitioner here in the Las Vegas, Nevada Valley. Her information came across the screen every so often, so please go see her and make an appointment. Email her with questions and comments. You may also do so in the comments section below, and we will get back to you. So thank you for joining us today, everybody. Have a great day. I'm Scott. This is the In Medicine and On Medicine podcast. We'll see you back in the studio next time.